please feel free during the meeting if you want to get up and get some coffee. There's some right over here and some tea. Feel free to do that. We'll go ahead and get started here. Thank you all for being here. Looks like we definitely have a quorum. So that's the good news. So we have a few new people here today. And so those of you that weren't here at the last technical committee meeting, go ahead, just introduce yourselves and say where you're from and go from there. So go ahead and start with you.
I'm Greg Langer with USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service here in Colorado Springs.
I'm Brian Whitehead with Colorado Springs Utilities.
Mark Gebhardt, El Paso County Development Services Department.
Let's see. Pete? You can go
Let me
ahead.
start. Okay. Peter Wysocki, Director of Planning and Community Development with the City of Colorado Springs.
April Lee Stepp, Conservation Biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife.
I'm Dan Cinta, sitting in for Darren Tangerman from Pueblo West.
I'm Troy Stover, I'm the Assistant Director of Aviation for Colorado Springs Airport.
You can go ahead if you do.
Okay, I'm Linda Morgan, Director of Community Development Services for Telecounty. Angela Essing with PPACG.
Dennis Thomas, Police and Program for 15th Space Vendor Streamer Air Force Base, where I'm representing Colonel Slade.
Air Force Fire Community Planner for Air Force Base.
I'm Wes Clark. I'm not a part of this committee, but I'm sitting in on behalf of the Military Affairs Council and the Defense Mission Task Force, just to kind of scope what the military involvement is for the Military Affairs Council.
Greg Dorman with the Colorado Department of Military and Veterans Affairs.
Todd Wynn, I'm the Deputy Base Civil Engineer at Peterson Air Force Base.
Can I go?
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
I got skipped.
Go for it.
But I'm Shannon Gord, I'm with CDOT Region 2.
All right. I guess with that, I mean, I could go ahead and do a roster check, but that's good enough there. So I'm Brian Potts. I'm with PPACG. I'm a Joint Land Use Study Planner too. And just to give a quick introduction for the few of you who are new to this table here, the technical committee is going to be basically working and monitoring the working groups that we're going to be setting up. And because all of you are involved in development, the application of regulations of various aspects of development, that's why you're all here at the table, is that you guys really will know within your realm of governance, you'll know kind of when something we need to adjust it slightly because there's a regulation that may not work, or there may be something out there that's good for everyone to know. So in this joint land use study, at the end of it, we're hopefully going to have a whole bunch of great recommendations that can be utilized by local communities and government agencies and the military installations to help with development and make sure that we're preserving both military operations and quality of life in the region. So that's kind of the end goal for those of you that may have needed that info. So first, did everyone fine with the agenda? Everyone take a look at the agenda. Have any items to add? No? Okay. In this case, we don't have a chair or vice chair yet. We'll get to that in a minute, but we'll consider the agenda approved for now. Everyone get a chance to look at the minutes from the March 3rd meeting last month. Any corrections or changes on those? And if not, that's good. Also, if anyone who wasn't here last meeting would like a packet from the last meeting, I do have copies of those as well, if you need those after the meeting. So I can provide those. Okay, with that then, so no topics to add to the current agenda? All right, seeing none. Any public comments? All right. In that case, we'll get right into it with reports. First of all, I'd like to introduce, let's see, James McMurray.
Hey.
Hey, there we are. If you would, go ahead and stand up and give an introduction and what we hope to have you do in conjunction with this study.
Okay. Hey, James McMurray, Senior Planner with HB&A, which is a local planning and architecture firm here in the Springs. We have been, we've just contracted with PPACG to support the public participation plan that's going to be going on as part of the entire JLUS effort. So I'm here, as well as Tess Ahern. You'll probably see Tess quite a bit. She's going to be providing, our lead on providing administrative support to the technical and policy committees. But in addition to the two of us, we've got a couple of partners on the team. Bachman PR is going to be involved, and also Tetra Tech, another military planning firm here in the they have a national presence and a lot of technical reach back they can bring to the table. So just a little bit by way of my background. My background is in land use planning and development. I actually came to Colorado Springs about 3 years ago to be on site, embedded with the military bases, to be a community planning liaison to help address regional challenges related to military and to the community. So this is a sort of a natural continuation of what I was doing before in a lot of ways. So some of the things that I was doing in that capacity was helping the bases work together regionally in a unified way to work with the community on issues like the stormwater ballot initiative that was a couple of years ago, the state water plan, things like that. So most of what we'll be doing is just helping with publicity and outreach. There will be a lot of opportunities to go out to a lot of community groups throughout the 4 counties, giving them a heads up what's going on, helping facilitate some workshops around some of the technical issues as we get further into that, and then just developing outreach materials, infographics, whatever's kind of needed to help you all and the team here at PPACG to do this whole thing successfully. So that's just kind of in a nutshell overview. I don't know, is there anything else specifically, Angela or Brian, that you had in mind that you wanted to share with the committee about what we'll be doing?
I think that's perfect. And maybe just as a little update, some of the attendees that weren't here at last meeting too. So we did do an RFP for the services, and HPMA was awarded that RFP. We did have some very good applicants. The competition was stiff, which is very nice. And it was all local consultants who applied for the RFP. So that was great, and we're excited to move forward with HPMA and continue through the process. And we'll talk a little bit more about the communication efforts that are ongoing right now and coming up, and that you'll be working on. So thank you, James, and Tess. We look forward to working with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Next, I'll just give you, as part of our staff update, we'll give you a rundown of some of the things that have been happening lately, progressing with the project. So on Tuesday night, and then we did a telephone town hall for Fremont County, and Tim Payne was going to be on that, but he was unfortunately having to cancel last minute, but we still went ahead anyway. We sent out about 7,400 phone calls, and given that there's our estimates in terms of landlines, there might be about 20,000 landlines, so we probably got maybe 50% of the outreach there. And it was a good discussion, and we're hoping that tonight we're going to be doing a telephone town hall for Teller County. So that'll be coming out, and I believe
Norm Steen.
Yeah, Commissioner Steen will be there. And so this is kind of our first part of outreach. The main goal is that we're trying to let people know the study is going on, let people know that there's a survey on our website, and that's the next thing I'll mention. On the main page of the PPACG website, there's now a survey that very prominently on the page where people can click. And so we want to encourage all of you, and we'll talk a little more about outreach later, but all of you, make sure this link gets out there as best as possible. If you want your public or your constituents or even some of the military personnel to know that this is out there so they can comment, that would be great. We want to get as much public feedback, public input as possible, obviously, because that's going to really inform this process and help us guide us as to what of the issues, the issues that are on that matrix, compatibility issues, which of those are the ones that really are coming to the top that we really need to form working groups on and progress forward. Later on, we'll talk more about working groups. So we're going to have that survey up until the end of May. So also, if there's someone that we need to get the link to, say, one of your IT people, if you want to put it on your website, that'd be great too. If you'd like that, let me know, and I can get that to you so you can put it on your website. And that way, hopefully, we can get a lot of good feedback from the public. Another little bit of house cleaning. Our next meeting is going to be June 2nd. So these first two meetings were a month apart because we're trying to get things going with setting up working groups and so forth. But now we're going to go to our more regular schedule of every other month at this point. And as I said before, if one of those meetings is coming up and we don't have anything we need to discuss, we're not going to meet for the sake of meeting. We'll cancel that meeting. But our meeting on June 2nd, just wanted to see, there's a conflict for meeting at this time and this location on June 2nd. Would anyone be fine with moving it to the afternoon, or would anyone like to host it that day? Now, I know you have to check your calendars and so forth, so you don't need to get back to me right away, but if you could just email me and we'll sort that out, and I can send out an email blast so everyone knows we're meeting next time. Luckily, we've got 2 months to kind of figure that out, roughly. So just something to think about, and let me know on that. The only other item I'll mention here is that with flight mapping, currently we are trying to map a lot of the different airspace uses that are occurring between civilian, military, and so forth. We're hoping to get a map together. We're going to certainly vet it through the military installations prior to make sure we've gotten things as accurate as possible. But the idea is that this map that we're developing will give both the committee here and the working group that will potentially be set up to study airspace issues, give them a good idea of how congested our airspace is and where there's conflicts. Now, what we're mapping currently is plane flights. So airspace used with helicopters, that's kind of the next thing that we're going to try and tackle. And so we're going to be working more with Fort Carson and Peterson on that to really get that nailed down. And we'll provide information to you as we get it sort of more complete picture. So that'll be coming up later too. And then the last item under reports, Monument. Any questions, by the way? If anyone has any questions, just raise your hand. And, Monument Creek Watershed Restoration Project Working Group update. Angela's been attending those meetings, and she can give us a brief update.
Yeah, we're going to kind of make this a standard practice. Once we proceed today too, we're going to form additional working groups. We'll give reports for each working group and the progress that they're making between each of your meetings. And so you heard the report last time on the Monument Creek watershed. There's not a lot to update this time. We did include the FTP site in your minutes, so if you were interested in going and seeing some of the files and information that's available, that was in the minutes from the last meeting. And the committee is really just continuing to formulate the data and review the data that's coming in at this point. Within probably the next 2 months, we'll be able to start looking at recommendations and a priority list. So at that time, we will bring that forward to this committee so that you can see where they're going with the recommendations and priorities.
Thank you. Yeah, so at least we already have one working group going, and probably by the end of this meeting, we may have a few more that can recommend to the policy group. So that'll be, things will really start going this weekend. So, yeah.
Just real quick, I don't think we turned all the microphones on. So you know, when it looks like it's on now because the light looks green, but you actually have to push that little button and then it turns blue, and that's when it's on. You can leave them off until you talk, but it does help people in the audience hear better too if we turn them on when we talk. So just be, I guess, aware of that.
All right, now that the meeting's officially starting, and we'll actually have a record of what we're talking about now. Good thing we didn't get to anything too important. Yeah, with that, the next thing is, at the last meeting, we didn't quite have enough attendance. It was early on. We're still getting people together. Hadn't totally identified everyone on the seats. By the way, did everyone receive a revised roster? There's a roster that was in the of the technical committee members that was in your packet. I handed them out to most of you, I think, before you got here. But if you don't have one, let me know, and I can get you one. This will be important later when we choose chair and vice chair. At this point, though, we need to just approve the bylaws and operating procedures. These are a basic set of meeting rules that were developed by the OEA, and we worked with them to just make sure that it was perfect for this community, for our particular purposes, for this study. So that's in your packets, and hopefully you had a chance to review them. Very basic standard meeting procedures, but it gets into some of the roles of what the policy committee, technical committee, and working groups will be. Anyone have any comments or additions or changes to the bylaws that they'd like to discuss? All right. Seeing none? Yeah.
Real quick, just for everyone's benefit, especially Greg, we did implement the change. We have similar bylaws and operating procedures for the policy committee. They had some recommended changes to those, and so we did implement their recommended changes in your bylaws and operating procedures for the technical committee, so they are consistent with the policy committee.
And those changes, just to let you know, it was more a matter of technical terms as to airspace use. In some cases, they said, well, it doesn't completely, the airspace is used by multiple parties, and it's not, it seemed like the military was regulating it in the way it was worded, so we changed that so it's more clean. So, all right. So with this, what we can just do is take just a verbal vote. Everyone. So either yay or nay as to whether you approve the bylaws and operating procedures. Go ahead and vote now. Yay or nay? Yay. Okay. Good. We're so excited about bylaws and operating procedures, but I'm glad we've got that. Okay. So we'll consider those adopted. Appeared to be majority. Okay. Okay. Election of chair and vice chair. This will be someone that will be running the meetings in the future. And so, of course, if you'd like, I can continue if the chair would like to defer to me. But at the moment, we need to elect a chair and vice chair. And we can do that through a motion. So per the bylaws, you can do a first and second. So are there any nominations for who should be chair? And we'll start off with chair. Any nominations for chair?
Also, it's good to reference your roster that Brian has distributed. The chair and vice chair, based on the bylaws and operating procedures, does need to be a voting member. So it's good to refer to that too. And maybe for the good of the order too, the reason that installations and federal entities are ex officio members is simply requirements through the grant and I think legally binding requirements with those federal organizations. So that is another reason why they are also ex officio members. We can also tell you we'll make it very easy on you. Brian and I will do 99% of the work for the chair and the vice chair. So there's our sales pitch.
Yes. I think you just need to show up and run the meetings, and that's about it. And if you're not here, the vice chair can do it. So, any nominations or anyone want to volunteer? Okay, great. Sounds good. Okay, so Greg Dorman is there anyone else? All right. Anyone want to make a motion to approve Greg Dorman?
Sure, I'll move that we approve Greg Dorman as chairman of the committee.
All right.
Second.
Second. All right. All right. So now we'll go ahead and approve. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right. Approved through unanimous consent there. All right. And for vice chair, anyone who would like to volunteer or nominate someone for vice chair, please. Seeing none, we'll do without. No, I'm just kidding. Anyone? Oh, thanks, Peter.
Peter.
All right, so Peter Wysocki for vice chair. Can I get a motion? Perfect. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, thank you. And with that, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, approved through unanimous consent. All right. With that, thank you very much. Now we can move on to discussing working groups. Within your packets, you'll see a memo, which hopefully you had a chance to review, that discusses the purpose of working groups and what we're trying to achieve with those. Pardon me a moment, I'm going to get to the slides that discuss working groups. So in your packet, there's a memo that was included that talks about, so the purpose of working groups are to, we're going to recommend working groups to the policy committee for approval. So given that all of us here are working with the regulations in various aspects, and also as installation planners, you're going to be more aware of what issues are actually coming up. And there's an issues matrix, which I actually should have, I can pull that up. But with these compatibility issues, there's some where we already know that there's going to be a need to delve into those further to develop some strategies on how to deal with land use compatibility conflicts that are coming up. And with that, at this point, there's a few recommendations in there that we as staff came up with. But obviously, you guys are the decision makers in this process, so what we want to do is that we can offer these up as potential working groups to recommend to the policy committee, but we'd also like to hear if there's some others that you feel should be stood up right now. This is not your only opportunity. There will be, as we go on and we examine certain issues, we can give you briefings on them. So just to give you a brief kind of overview of why staff felt that these were kind of the initial ones, and to give you a little background. USAFA training, USAFA training, yeah, it should be flight training program, sorry. That program, we had some, the Air Force Academy has been working with local residents and trying to address some of the complaints that have come up about the training program. Now, obviously, the Air Force has been doing training for a long time, but there's been some issues that have come up recently where citizens were being more vocal and had complaints about the flights of the cadets over their neighborhoods. What's been determined is that, of course, the Air Force has done a lot of work in working with these residents and trying to address their concerns. But one of the things we saw is that perhaps going forward there's a need for developers, real estate agents, military, local officials to look at what are some ways potentially to educate the public or provide some strategies to reduce the conflicts in the future where people either, some people didn't seem to be aware that there was going to be training over them. And in other cases, it was just the frequency of it. It seemed as though it had become more intense. So we just want to set up a working group to just take a look at moving forward. The Air Force Academy has tried to do quite a bit to address these concerns, but perhaps it's going to need multiple parties to kind of develop a strategy together. And so that's the idea behind that working group. And we can tackle these one at a time. We can go kind of yay or nay if you think we should recommend this to the policy committee, or we can do them all at once. What would be the? Oh, yes. Yes, I do. Here we go. This was the slide I was originally looking for. So yeah, there's some stakeholders that we thought of for the working group, and so this is kind of as wide of a list as we could come up with. So take a look at these, and let's feel free to discuss. We can discuss these now if you feel that one is appropriate, or if there's someone that's missing from this that we should have on the working group, we should certainly discuss that.
Just so everyone knows, too, I think that Brian maybe touched on this, but to give a little more explanation, too, and looking at this one specifically, we do want to focus on the area around the Air Force Academy. There will potentially be other working groups that will be focused around Peterson, and so there could be like similar working groups. We formed the Stormwater Task Force working group, which again is around the Air Force Academy. We're proposing another stormwater group that would work more with the southern stormwater watershed areas, those type of things. So we can have multiple flight working groups, multiple stormwater working groups, those type of things. So again, the focus on our proposal for this one, based on a lot of work that has been done through the Business Alliance and the Air Force Academy to date, with a lot of the the issues around this. So we're, again, trying to build upon what they're doing and take it to the next step. Understanding this group will meet to understand if and when and how we would do a noise study to look at the noise in that area, how the communication is working with the community, those type of things. So our recommendations for this working group have come with quite a bit of education from what's been done, people who have been involved, and people who we feel we could include in the future, again, to build upon the work that's been done. But again, you are the experts, and we do want everyone's opinion in helping us understand if we do have the right people on such a working group.
Angela, to your point, I'm concerned that I think this is a very valid issue, and we should have this working group because I think this is a hotspot issue in our community right now. But I want to, I think we need a writ large community airspace group because, to Brian's earlier when you were talking about Fort Carson, et cetera, you know, the National Guard owns a range, an air range on Fort Carson. The National Guard has an aviation unit on Peterson. The reserves have a unit. So there are other users that won't be inherently represented if you only talk to the base. And then there's a lot of transitional aircraft. So I think it's important that we maybe have a larger sort of general airspace group that everyone feeds into, and then subgroups specific to, like, Air Force Academy's issue, Carson with the HAMIT training issue, and those things. So that's...
You know, that brings up another good point, because this is something that, as we've learned about what's already been done with Air Force's training flight training program and with some of the operations at other installations, it was a matter of, you know, at what scale do we need to do this? Do we need to have an overall regional, or do we need it in certain groups, you know, and smaller? And so maybe that is the solution, is that we do have kind of some key figures that are there throughout, because it's, you know, they deal with airspace, or they deal with real estate in the entire area, for example. So yeah, I think that could be a good way to do that. So.
And historically, a few years back, there was an initiative coming out of New Mexico to kind of create some flight training area through Colorado, as some of you may recall. And that was the only time when we were kind of reacting to that proposal that we brought all the bases together under the auspices of then Senator Udall's kind of leadership. But we had Carson Peterson. Everybody sat in a room together and talked about their concerns, and that was a very helpful exercise at the time. So I think that having that kind of, like, you know, just an individual from each organization to talk broadly will be helpful in coordinating to the specific issues like the Air Force Academy.
Okay. And then the other thing is, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there may be a difference in terms of an airspace group relating to helicopters versus airplanes, because they do have very different flight patterns, very different impacts. So that's the other thing. I just want to see, is there support to maintain that distinction, or do you think we should put those all together?
Well,
I think that has to be all together.
yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So,
All right. So.
airspace in general has to be one working
Right.
group.
Okay.
Right.
I agree with that. And I think you also are going to have to look at how to bring Denver Center into this.
And they were
Airspace is a domino effect. Once you start with one piece of it, you're going to domino into the national system.
Okay. Yeah, because our understanding is that there are planes from Buckley and from other places flying through this airspace, and so it.
Whether you're IFR, VFR, instrument or flight or visual, is going to depend on a lot of what you're doing with those flight paths.
Okay.
And Denver Center is going to be a big piece of that. So, and I don't represent the federal aviation, but I think it's important to reach out to our local air traffic control tower. I thought he was on this list, Scott.
Oh, Scott Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to do some outreach with him then, and perhaps.
As you get into airspace, you're going to need Scott to be involved.
Okay, all right.
Just as a data point on this, it was the FAA that changed the traffic patterns at Air Force Academy, east of the Air Force Academy, that forced some of the noise problems that they're now encountering up around the monument area.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct, and a lot of that was due to the Denver traffic coming from the south and getting that highway in the sky from the south up to Denver International and putting them onto an approach into DIA. So that was 2-3 years ago
Yes.
that occurred. So that's why I say Denver Center, Federal Aviation needs to be at least a resource for this so they can understand that bigger picture of this community.
All right. That's a very good, yeah.
So let's talk about some more specifics too, which I think will help us keep moving too after this meeting. So I've heard we should have obviously somebody from each of the installations, except for maybe in this case Schriever and, or Schriever, okay.
There is some restricted airspace directly over Schriever Air Force Base too, just a portion of it. So we would at least want to be involved.
Okay.
We have probably a pretty minor role, but just for
Okay, but
awareness.
still have to see. Okay,
Well,
perfect.
and actually, Cheyenne Mountain has expressed concerns about their lack of restricted airspace in the past, so.
Okay, so exactly. So perfect. We can do every installation. Then obviously the yourself, Troy, and then somebody from the Denver Center. We've also had, and I don't know if this would be a subgroup, but just for a point of discussion too, we've also had a lot of interest in this topic from the National Forest Service, from the Bureau of Land Management, those type of things. Should we include them at the table? I guess, how do you see this first group, Greg? Maybe a little more discussion about how you see this first group, and then how do you see the subgroups underneath it?
Certainly. Well, I think airspace writ large is to Troy's point, we can have FAA, we can have the airport, we can have everybody who feels that they should be there, be there. It shouldn't be really restricted. I think BLM and Forest Service may be interested in being part of the larger group. I think their more specific concerns are related to the HAMET program and the frequently used landing areas of the rotary wing aviation, et cetera. So I would leave it up to them whether they certainly give them the opportunity to participate in a larger group. They may choose to limit their participation to the subgroup related to Carson and their training. So
you'd see them more on like a Fort Carson subgroup if there's something, or a helicopter, HAMET is probably more better way to
the
put
high
it.
altitude mountain, environment training. Again, I would leave that up to them.
Okay.
Because they may see focuses areas on both because low-flying aircraft, be it over the academy or somewhere else. I mean, there's Forest Service land right behind the academy that, we've overflown in helicopters. I've seen jets overfly. I mean, so there could be impacts at any level, and so we'll let them decide that. But certainly I would think their hot-button issue right now is HAMET.
Okay.
So.
Great. Yeah.
Well, I don't know if this is the time to talk about this, but Fremont County has a lot of prisons, and they're concerned with airspace. So. Both federal and state prisons. And our airport actually adjoins state prison property. So there's been an issue a time or two regarding training operations at our airport. And the prison wasn't notified and weren't too happy about it. But
Okay. So yeah, we'll probably have to have someone related to the corrections agencies that are in charge of those at the table as well for some of this.
Yeah, and I also think this is maybe a good discussion too, because we have talked about this in the office, is probably a representative from airports like Fremont, Pueblo, each of those airports also invited to the table. So we do have a good inventory through our mapping and could come up with representatives from each of those airports then too that would be involved.
And I see a comment or question from Glenn Meskey. Yeah.
Are you guys going to subgroup this out to compatible land uses within those flight corridors concerning the KPZ, RPZ development within those areas, because that's going to be affected quite severely too, depending on the type of aircraft, that kind of stuff. They're out to those compatible land uses within those corridors have to be addressed. Is that going to be a subgroup to this, or is it going to or is that going to be a separate technical working group?
Well, I would say that because we're not creating any new airspace, we're just assessing what we have. There's no, we're not going to be changing any APZs or anything because.
No, we're not, or the group's not, but however,
Right.
within those certain APZs, we don't have some of those in the airport overlay zones. Some of them do, and it can help with development within those, so there's no conflicts, especially from the military side, because we can't control the development outside installation, but we can help them
Right.
understand that by building
Well, we, just side note, we did the law in 2010 about the notification of zoning changes within 2 miles of an installation so we hope we address that at the state level already. I bring this up every time I can because I think the education of that effort and how the installations relate to that law and the use is always, I think people forget about it. And so we may have addressed that. I think we can, to your point, I think that we can talk in the larger aerospace working group about how to address that, be it a subgroup or.
And to kind of touch on that briefly, one of the things is that the fourth slide we're going to get to is going to be shareholders to consider for an intergovernmental communication working group, because that may be where it comes in is a matter of communication between local governments, developers, the installations. So that may be a place where we can kind of put it in there. So, Bob? Yeah.
And not meaning to open the aperture too wide here, but I haven't heard, we've talked about fixed wing, we've talked about rotary wing, and then just looking, I thought about Steve Rose and one of his comments at one of our earlier get-togethers on this is drones,
Right.
or RPVs, or UAVs, or whatever you want to call them. They've been having trouble at Cheyenne Mountain with people just flying their drones over Cheyenne Mountain.
Well, and that was to my earlier comment about the desire for restricted airspace in the Cheyenne Mountain.
So that's definitely, I mean, those are for good, bad, don't know how you feel about it, but that's, aircraft using airspace. And they are supposedly FAA blessed to fly around up there. And so just thought we might want to talk about that if we're opening the aperture past SAFA and our training activities.
That's a good comment. Yeah, because drones are certainly becoming both the military's use of drones and private side. That's certainly something that's come to the forefront just in the last year. So, yeah.
So, obviously, we've expanded now the size of this working group to a pretty, I think, unmanageable size if we start including everybody. So, two options, right? We either have kind of a smaller, maybe include other installations other than USAFA and some other communities, but kind of have the main working group, and then have smaller, maybe presentations from other installations or from other interested stakeholders, i.e. like ELM, like maybe through Fremont County and the prison system, just to present to the larger group and then the main group, and then the main group presents back to this group. Because I think if we get 20 people in the working group, I don't think that'll be very productive. I do agree that it has to expand beyond USAFA and beyond. I think this was kind of intended for the northern part of Colorado Springs and El Paso County, but I do think we need to expand and include other areas. I'm just worried that if we have a big group, or too big of a group, we could lose focus.
Great comment.
So I don't know how you staff want to kind of manage that, but.
Yeah.
I think what I'm a little bit concerned about too, to that point, Peter, is that we are somewhat incredibly time sensitive too for the Air Force Academy's specific issues and a lot of work that's already been done. So what I would maybe, as discussion for the committee too, is if we could start working on this larger group, but at the same time, understanding that we're absolutely going to need this subgroup for the Air Force Academy, start working on the subgroup at the same time for the Air Force Academy. So, and knowing that that will be a subgroup and something that we need to look at. And the reason why it's incredibly time sensitive, obviously this is only a 2-year study, but the height of their flight training program is in June, July, and August. And so if we are to do some noise study efforts and those type of things, the time is coming very, very quickly that we're going to need to do that this summer, or else we're going to miss our window of opportunity. So as you guys, if we could do those two at the same time, and then I think with the larger group, we can come up with additional subgroups. But because of the work that's been done, we kind of know this is a needed subgroup.
And I would agree. I think to a degree, there's a lot of development in that part of El Paso County. And I think issues there are different perhaps than in more rural areas. And for example, the Realtors Association probably don't need to be as involved in some of the rural issues. like they are with residential issues, particularly around USAFA. So I would agree that I think this is important for USAFA, obviously, probably for Monument, Colorado Springs, and northern El Paso County in general, because that is constant. It's a constant issue for those residents and developers in that area.
So I think what we've uncovered is, and I've known this for a while, that airspace writ large is an issue, almost probably one that could have its own technical committee. But I move that we proceed in order on these recommended groups because, again, I still think that the USAFA flight training program has validity, is an urgent issue, and does need its own group. So I'm, out of respect for everyone's time, let's vote on these groups, discuss and vote, and then have a separate conversation about airspace writ large and how we want to address that either now or in the future. So that's my motion. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Any opposed? Okay. Brian, could you?
Sure.
Do we need to talk more about the Air Force Academy working group? Any discussion on that? Because if there's not, I think I'm comfortable with taking a vote. Okay. Can I have a motion to adopt this subcommittee? Or working group, excuse me. Thank you, Linda. Second? I'll second. Okay. All in favor? All right. Thank you. Any opposed? Okay. Great. We have our first working group. So,
Excellent.
Brian, could you lead us through the discussion on the next proposed group?
So the next one that was that we thought may be a good idea, but we wanted to bring it to you guys to see what you thought. So, of course, stormwater issues have primarily been discussed and have been a primary concern further to the north, surrounding the development that's gone on around the Air Force Academy. But we thought, given that there are of course stormwater is going to occur everywhere, perhaps there's a need to explore, is there anything that we should, strategies to develop going forward with the southern region around Fort Carson, Fountain, that it may be useful to have a working group to just take a look and see if there's anything that should be addressed before it becomes a problem. And so that was the idea behind a potential stormwater working group for the south region of Colorado Springs and down there. Has anyone had any experience where there may be a need to have a group and look at potential things that may be starting to come up down there around Fountain and Fort Carson? Or is this something that the committee doesn't feel is necessary? Any thoughts on that? Has anyone heard of any stormwater issues down in the southern portion? Unfortunately, yeah.
When you're on the stormwater issue, I don't know how important it might be to this group, but the north portal at the Cheyenne Mountain complex, of course, had a big problem last year with stormwater, which feeds directly in, I think, down to Fountain Creek. I don't know whether it has had any impact on the housing area below Fort Carson there or not, but I think that stormwater issue needs to be looked at from the standpoint of Cheyenne Mountain. And also the Air Force Academy, as I recall, had some flooding up in their part. So just to focus, maybe go back to what Greg said, it may be part of the larger issue in this thing, but maybe not the specific of trying to get this southern part worked out quickly.
And sorry, just of course with the Monument Creek stormwater working group, they're dealing with a lot of stuff up north, but yes, there may be a need to look at it more of a even larger scale or more coordination between the north and things going on in the south, since that all eventually flows further down. So stormwater is a regional issue. So yeah, that's a good point on that. But yeah, Cheyenne Mountain, that may be something that needs a specific strategy. So if anything, unless anyone has any other comments on stormwater down south, maybe at this point we could start a working group related to that particular issue, just to come up with some strategy related to Cheyenne Mountain.
One thing I do want to share on Fountain Creek is the Fountain Creek Watershed Flood Control and Greenway District that David Small or Larry Small is running, former council member, and any discussions on that ought to have his involvement, because there is a district that's overlaying that, and make sure they're included.
we would want to just add Cheyenne Mountain to this working group and address it that way.
Yeah.
Because that's a pretty small.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing, is that I started large, and we can certainly get it to working specifically on the places where we know there's an issue. So with Cheyenne Mountain, we could certainly make it specific to that.
Because I agree with your own Clark. I think we need to take a look at that.
Okay,
And I think if we put that include them as part of this, I think we can address that.
great. Okay. So with this one, with the stormwater group, if you'd like, you can just, Chair, if you'd like, you can just vote on a motion just to have a working group that studies that Cheyenne Mountain issue and look into that.
Yeah, I'm somewhat concerned that Fort Carson is not represented in this forum, and they would be the other primary
Okay.
regional neighbor. So I'm of two minds. One, I mean, since Peterson essentially represents Cheyenne Mountain, if they see a need, then let's proceed. If they don't, then let's table it until such time as we can get Fort Carson's input. So I defer to Todd to make a motion or whatever you think is. Well, you're not a voting member, but
Right.
if you gave, what would you like us to move?
Again, I think we just include it in this working group and
Okay.
address it there.
Okay.
Okay, so
Because we've already got Fort Carson in there,
Mhm.
so I think there's, synergy with that. So I think if we can go that route, I think we'd be fine.
great. Okay, then I move that we adopt this working group with the addition of Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station as part of the covered installations. Thank you, Linda. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. All right, that is approved. Next committee, Brian, our working group.
So in the next, transportation has certainly come up frequently as we've, so far, talking with the installations that we have met with. And so the idea we had with, and this could be a model that kind of informs maybe how the airspace working group could work. What we realize is that transportation is, of course, somewhat regional, but also there's specific areas around each installation that may have specific issues where the other installations may not necessarily need to be on that working group. So what we consider is that we have we do this in phases. So you have a core group of people that will need to be involved with each installation, but then we have certain communities that would be involved surrounding each individual installation. So, for example, at Fort Carson, Fountain and Fremont County would certainly want to be involved with transportation issues surrounding Fort Carson, but we may not need Monument in there at that point. So that was kind of our theory about this, is that we could do it in phases, and that we're not overloading certain members having 3 different working groups or subgroups meeting at once, trying to tackle 3 different issues. So that was our strategy with this. So, but certainly transportation is an issue. There's traffic surrounding when you have, of course, large numbers of personnel coming in and out, and just capacity for getting things in and out of the installations. So there's certainly a need to examine this and look at some long-term strategies and look at what opportunities there may be in the future for projects, if that's where that working group may want to go. Yeah.
Brian, I just have a question about how this will complement or support the PPACG Transportation Advisory Committee, because a lot of our organizations at the table here also participate in that committee, and I would hope that we could leverage the work that Craig Hasper and his staff are doing to help this, whatever we're going to proceed with on this.
Absolutely. We believe that it would be helpful to have someone from the PPACG Transportation or whoever may be appropriate, RTA or so forth, on that working group to make sure that they're kind of coordinating with other aspects that are going on with funding. So, yeah, that's a good comment.
Well, Brian, let me ask, I know in the policy committee we basically took the Monument Watershed working group and made that a working group. If there's an existing forum that's already doing this, do we just, assume that they're, vote them in as the existing working group rather than reinvent the wheel?
That's certainly a possibility, yes.
Okay, so all right, so I'd love to hear, Shannon's nodding her head, so I'd love to hear some, since I'm not familiar with the working group.
This is my first time here, and I don't have all the planning background. However, that sounds like an absolutely great idea, and CDOT would support that.
Is we certainly don't want to duplicate efforts. That's certainly a core function of this study, is that we're trying to incorporate existing working groups that may be out there and just see if we can assign them some joint land use study related tasks. That's certainly a good idea.
Are the installations appropriately represented in that group? So, okay. As long as they're comfortable. Marshall?
Is maybe an educational thing for me, but when you say CDOT, does that include the State Patrol?
No.
No.
CDOT falls under Department of Public Safety. So
That would be-
do you see a role for State Patrol in what sense?
The transportation? I mean,
And actually, that does bring up, for example, I know out at Schriever with Highway 94, there's been a lot of incidents related to car accidents and other things the State Patrol would respond to, and that points to maybe the safety or some problems within a particular bottleneck or so forth. They may be good to bring in maybe for some comment. We'll have to figure out how they can be incorporated. But that may be something we can get numbers from them or at least communicate with them. Another thing to point out is that on this transportation group that exists, PPACG only handles Park, Teller, and El Paso. So we do have Fremont and Pueblo not included on that transportation committee if we were to just adopt that. So that would be something we'd have to figure out how to combine the interests of those other areas.
Certainly. And I think that you tell me, because I'm not familiar with this existing group, but I feel like they could be asked to join for the purposes of this study as opposed to, again,
Yes.
And so to your point, sir, I think that State Patrol is more of a response entity, and CDOT fully tracks all the,
Safety.
accidents, fatalities, those kinds of issues. So they're well aware of the issues on a given roadway, in my experience in working with them. But I also have relationship with CSP, so I'm happy to talk to them about their interest in participating when the time comes, to your point. So, again, to Peter's earlier point, my fear is if you invite CSP, they're going to say, well, what about the county sheriffs and all the other entities that do, traffic enforcement, traffic safety, and then you're going to grow exponentially from there. So that would be my only concern.
Greg, just one point. Having worked this Defense Mission Task Force, the El Paso County Sheriff did ramp up the patrols out along Highway 94 in order to kind of cut down on some of the accidents and speeding and other violations that were occurring out there. So certainly the Sheriff's Department has a role from that standpoint.
Right, and that's my concern is I've learned, unfortunately, through a motor vehicle accident, that CSP will only respond to certain roads at certain times at certain places, and the same for, counties and cities. So we're going to end up with a significant amount of different jurisdictions and different departments engaged if we do go down that road.
So yeah, with this working group, if you'd like, we can adopt the need for this, and staff can try and work out how to utilize that existing committee, and then when we get to the policy committee, we can have a recommendation, I guess. Whatever you think on that, we can certainly try and explore that and see. Because I'm not too familiar. I haven't had much involvement with the transportation committee, but I think that's a good place to start with this working group. And we can find a way to add other jurisdictions as needed to that.
Okay. Then I will make a motion that we have a transportation working group and that we wait for staff recommendation on whether we can utilize existing groups, transportation groups, to kind of build the foundation for this.
Okay.
I second the motion.
Discussion point, I do want to ensure, to Mr. Butler's point, that Fremont and Pueblo counties it's in writing that we will include them and make sure that they are duly considered and consulted and participants in anything we do.
Absolutely.
Okay. We have a second. We've had discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. All right, next one.
So the last working group that we feel needs some, and this is a very conceptual and general kind of working group, and perhaps the committee here can give some more guidance as to maybe to what extent communication is addressed. But clearly, one of the key things with development is that as development comes in, there are, of course, as Greg mentioned, laws that talk about referrals and so forth, but there may be a need to kind of have everyone sitting down and saying, hey, what is working really well and what may need some improvement. And also there can be some informing if something's working really well at one installation in terms of development process, and also understanding the installations, in some cases it takes it may take a certain amount of time to do a review, and just making sure that review processes are at least accounting for that. So the idea was that, again, with this intergovernmental communication working group, we could also have sort of a core group of stakeholders that tend to be involved with all the installations, and then also bring communities in as needed with certain phases where we take a focus at different installations. So that was, again, the concept behind this. So could start off with USAFA, for example. And there's no particular order here in terms of importance or urgency necessarily. There's just something we threw out there for the sake of discussion. So how does the committee feel about this potential working group? Any comments or direction?
I have a comment. So what do you see DNR bringing to this working group? Or why was that placed in this particular working group?
Well, in some cases, because we are dealing with development perhaps out in the county, there is wildlife that is affected, Preble's meadow jumping mouse in some cases. We know that there's burrowing owls in certain locations. And that's the thing, is that wildlife corridors, we don't know if there's honestly, I don't know what wildlife corridors may exist in some areas where development is taking place.
Okay.
And so we felt that that would be appropriate, given that we do have some more rural mountainous areas that are being considered in some of these technical committees.
Okay.
That have more
Good.
wildlife. So.
Well, I do think this is an important working group. I think it's important particularly for for boards and commissions and councils that approve some of these projects, because they often get confused. And I mean, with no disrespect, about what authority installations have over local land use, development review process, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we should use this as an opportunity to evaluate. I think that's what we mean by intergovernmental communication, is how do particularly reviewing departments communicate with installations? What is the process? What are the perceived expectations, particularly by elected officials? So I would support this, yes. And I think your layout there is good. I certainly don't want to exclude any agency that reviews projects close to the installation. So whether we move up other cities and counties to the core phase, but.
Yeah, and also with this, are there any recommendations, say if we start, that maybe one area they may feel there's a bigger need to address in a certain area right now? That's certainly something that committee can recommend. If you'd like to say, maybe Fort Carson, there's an urgent issue that you're noticing that we should set up a working group working on that right now, certainly that's something else we'd look for guidance from the committee. Or is this order fine?
So my only comment, and I defer to the vice chair, is the name, in the sense that I feel like the whole joint land use study is essentially an intergovernmental communication concept. So to me, this is more about planning and community planning, and we have the right people in the room. We have a lot of planners in this room. So I just think to make it more clear of who to bring to the table, because if I were representing Fort Carson right now that I understand what this is, instead of sending my public affairs people, I'd send my public works people. But if I looked at the title, I'd probably send my public affairs shop instead. So,
give you a little background on the name here. Originally, I'd set this up as the Development Review Working Group.
Okay, but
then I thought
that sets off a lot of
broaden it
alarms
to start off,
Yeah.
and then we bring it back. So if it's something with whatever you guys would like to call it is fine with us. We just thought we'd start at the 10,000-foot level, since we're dealing with airspace. Just kidding. A larger level, and then you guys could bring it down. So other suggestions on names would be great. Or focus.
I got off the rails when you said, and we'll start with USAFA. and I got to tell you, Brian, and it's probably me, and I just need some help with this, but if I had to go back and explain this to Colonel Dunn or to General Williams or even to General Johnson, I have no idea what this thing does. And we're first.
Yeah.
And I could send my civil engineers or I could send my PA person, but I don't know who to send now, and I'm kind of lost as to what this working group actually does, is supposed to do.
Well, one of the things we thought about is that, of course, the initial thing that we were thinking about for communication was just, I guess it's sort of an opportunity to do a little check and say, how is development review referrals working? How well is this working right now? How is the communication working right now between the military and whatever jurisdictions review is being sent to? So, I mean, that's where we can kind of start. Yeah, Angela.
Maybe as an idea, and taking off Greg's kind of idea with the flights. So obviously we've met with a lot of people and understood kind of comments in populating the compatibility issues. And I want to speak to this too with April, your kind of comment too about
it had to do with the title.
Why is the DNR involved? And so I think there's this kind of big umbrella of communication where we've even heard, the National Forest Service will say to us, like, well, there's helicopters coming in, but when we call Fort Carson, they say they're not Fort Carson's. So then who do we call? Do we call Peterson? And so there's all these communication efforts too between whether it's Teller County, El Paso County, City of Colorado Springs, and or National Forest, Bureau of Land Management. Everybody kind of has this communication with the installations and how should it work. So having said that, maybe we start with a really big group in some sense, a representative kind of from, it seems odd too, because I guess talking through this, it's somewhat like the technical group, but just talking about the communication piece. And then we start to break it down, and I don't know if we've even broken it down right with what you said too, Bob. Is it more of who works with City of Colorado Springs and El Paso County, and then we bring in the appropriate installations for that, and then we say who works with the DNR, the National Forest Service, those type of things, and we bring in the installations that work with those.
Which would be a lot of overlap.
Yeah, that's what I'm worried about too. So
would it be better to maybe have a fourth group, whatever, how many groups we have, maybe about communication? Okay, if there's some kind of exercise going on, or who do community stakeholders call to find out what's going on, that's different communication than the development review process. Maybe this is the development review process working group, and there is another kind of intergovernmental communication that, okay, USEF is conducting some kind of exercise, or Peterson, how do they communicate with local jurisdiction? That's different than the development review process, because that's very technical, very kind of specific, and entails very different personnel, certainly from cities and counties' perspective, I think. So maybe I would make a suggestion that communication in general be different from the development review process communication.
And this discussion has been good because it's brought up. Maybe what is needed is that for now we stand up some kind of development review working group, and then staff, we can go and kind of look at getting more specifics as to types of communication between the military and local governments on specific issues that may be needing some improvement or just needing some additional knowledge or information with knowing who to contact for what. And we can do some research and then bring that back to the technical committee for that aspect. So for now, we could just set up development review.
I like that concept. I think we could talk for hours about communication and how, when base commanders change every 2 to 3 years, et cetera. So I think that's that has to be a separate issue. But I think that a development review, which was what I think, based on what you said, this was originally targeted at, is an important component that needs to be discussed. So I'm going to let someone who actually does development review make a motion.
El Paso County, go ahead. I'll move that we form a development review working group.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes.
And just to, so you don't have to worry, Bob, we can communicate with each installation, and you guys, if you want, can choose who goes first, if you'd like to do that. We can work those
I
details out.
certainly would love for you, Safa, to go first. But I'm biased.
Well, no, I really appreciate the clearing it up in my mind. Communication is a wonderful thing, and we need more of it. I was just wondering, how this kind of was going to fit into this, and it did seem like a lot of overlap. But this is something that we definitely would be incredibly interested in up at the academy, because it's Bob's personal opinion, but we're starting to feel like a little bit being surrounded up there.
And I think what we could do, maybe, this is or an idea, I guess, we could start with a group that looks at a lot of people at the table who are involved in development review and the installations, and then we could talk about some best practices that are happening, some practices that need improvement, and kind of go from there. And then if we need to single out particular installations from there, we could do that. But let's start with the bigger group first.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Brian, talk
Okay.
about Speakers Bureau.
Yes, thank you. Next item is, what we're starting to do here is that we're planning as staff to go out and make presentations to various community groups, in each county, and we've come up with some ideas just to get the word out, so we can generate some more public input from the study, the survey that I mentioned earlier that's on our website. So we thought, well, we could bring this to the group, and with each thought, well, a good way to group it is by county, just to start off, and then we can kind of go from there. So some of the ideas we had was going to each county's planning commission, perhaps the county, the Chamber of Commerce, and I'm sorry, go ahead. Neighborhood organizations. So if anything, we can either discuss these here for Speakers Bureau contacts, or if you'd rather go back to your jurisdictions and come up with some ideas and email them to us, that would be fine too. We just wanted to see if you, as a technical committee, felt fine with the ideas we've come up with so far. So thus far, with El Paso County, Kono is another one we threw in there. Any other additions at this point in time that you'd like to recommend?
So let me get something straight. Y'all as the staff here at PPACG, Joint Land Use staff, will go out and speak to these groups.
Yeah.
You're just trying to find out what are good groups to go speak to.
Yes. Inform them of this, that this is going on, because again, we're still getting the word out. Technically, we're early on in this. I'm just trying to get the word out so that the citizens know, oh, I can comment, and giving the citizens an idea of what this process is, starting to get that information out. So.
And I'm always the time person, so we are within the public communication process, and this is why we hired HB&A to help us with this. The Speakers Bureau, within the month of April and May, we'd like to reach all these groups. And the reason why it's important to do it here quickly in April and May is we want to involve people from the very beginning of the project. Everybody's a planner here at this table, so we understand that if we don't involve people from the very beginning, it can hurt us on the back end of the project. So this is our huge effort to get as many people in the communities involved as possible. And because resources are somewhat limited, as I think Rachel's presented it at the last meeting too with the public participation plan, we can't go to every Rotary, so we'd really like to pick like the 5 biggest hits that we can make within each county. And each county is going to be made up differently. So what is that? Obviously in El Paso County, an easy one for us is to go to CONO, the Council of Neighborhood Organizations. We're going to hit every neighborhood organization in Colorado Springs. And so that's an easy one for us, and we're familiar with that. But we're not as familiar with Pueblo County, Teller County, those type of those areas, and what your groups are like that, where we can make a huge impact. The reason the timing is incredibly important, too, is because the initial survey needs to be filled out here in April and May. So it's currently live, and then at the end of May, we'll populate the final results from that, which will help us move forward with the second phase of the public communication and the report. And obviously, the these working groups that you've just recommended today are going to need the information from that survey too, to know how they need to move forward. So this is super important in the fact that we really want to try to saturate this. So although Brian's giving you some permission to send an email, I'm going to make it a little more urgent and say, please speak up at this meeting so we can try to populate this as much as possible. And then if you have additional ideas, email us.
So if anything, I could just go county by county, and then we can populate that and then vote to approve if that's fine. So yes. So we'll start off with El Paso County. We have the El Paso County Planning Commission, CONO, and Greater Colorado Springs Regional Business Alliance with MAC. Any other recommendations for that? For
There's a northern county group called NEPCO.
NEPCO?
CONO doesn't include many members outside of the city limits.
Okay.
So if you want to get to the rural communities or the monument area, it's called NEPCO.
Excellent. I'll certainly communicate with you as to contact for that and get your communications, Rachel Beck, get in contact with you on that. So.
What about the HBA?
HB&A?
HBA.
Oh,
Home Builders
HBA.
Association.
Yeah, I was just.
You've got the business, but you don't have the building association.
Okay.
Did I steal your thunder, Peter?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Did I steal your thunder?
I didn't hear what you said though earlier.
HBA?
Home builders?
You know, it's a good question, because obviously they will be probably represented in other probably working groups. Maybe going to their policy committee, probably be the best place to start. They meet once a month. Kind of has to be by invitation only. Well, you're probably familiar with that. But I think that might be pretty important, particularly when we get into let them know that we will be discussing development review processes. Probably seek their input later when we talk about the flight patterns and how we communicate with home buyers and developers, et cetera, et cetera. So, yes, and I would also then suggest City Planning Commission, City of Colorado Springs. I know that falls under, we are within El Paso County,
Absolutely.
but we don't,
Absolutely.
our planning commission doesn't talk to theirs,
Okay.
or vice versa.
Certainly.
Is the assumption that PPACG writ large is well aware of this project, and therefore we don't need to brief the PPACG board?
Yeah, they've already,
Okay,
they've already been
so-
briefed on. They were the first to be briefed on this, essentially, so. Yeah.
I just want to make sure that, I pretty much knew that, but I want to
Yeah,
make sure
just
that was
make-
clear
yeah.
so that, because that would reach obviously a large.
We'll make sure you're talking to your boss.
That's right. It's on the record now that we have. Yeah, there we go. All right, any other additions with El Paso County? Any other ideas? Okay, move on to Pueblo County. With Pueblo County, any ideas aside from those two up there as to other organizations? Yes.
Brian, a couple of things related to just what you're talking about. The City Planning and Zoning Commission would certainly be on par with the County Planning Commission.
Mhm.
I think the question I would have is, have you had conversations with Pueblo Area Council of Governments?
And Joan Armstrong, who's the development director for Pueblo County, is also on the. So we've talked with her, and so we've let her know that she should let that COG know as well. But we could certainly make a presentation at that one.
Because obviously the COG is a very, strategic group.
Yeah.
Make sure that you're included.
Okay, very good. All right, any other ideas for Pueblo County?
What about making a presentation to, is there a neighborhood with the Pueblo West? Like, is there a?
Them people are strange.
Is there a way to get to?
Yeah, no, and that's where, Pueblo West does have an elected board, but you don't have elected boards, listed here, like the city councils or, and that's maybe where the COG can stand that, because Pueblo West does have a representative that sits on the COG.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right.
But far be it for me to say.
Okay. Any other suggestions on Pueblo County area? All right. Teller County, within that area, we currently have Planning Commission. We thought maybe the library, we could do a presentation there. Woodland Park, Chamber of Commerce. Any other ideas?
Those are the top three that I can think of.
Okay.
America, we don't have a lot of the established associations with property owners and different homeowners associations. So that's not really an avenue available like we are with the cities. So I think we can start with this, and we can certainly share with you if we think of anything else that might be beneficial.
Wonderful. All right, any other comments? All right, and then Fremont County, we thought the County Planning Commission, certainly we could do Canyon City Planning Commission if that's appropriate, and then the Upper Arkansas, I can't remember what the other A stands for.
Area Council.
Area Council of Governments, very good, okay, yeah. So those are our ideas so far.
Well, Canyon and Florence both have Chamber of Commerce. I don't know. But Penrose is an unincorporated community, and the closest thing that they have to real government for the area is their Chamber of Commerce.
Okay.
So I would include them.
Is there a Penrose Chamber of Commerce?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other ideas for Fremont County?
Well, we'd also talked about the possibility of Arkansas Headwaters.
Arkansas Headwaters? Okay. That would be good.
Which is not limited to Fremont County, but
Certainly it has impact since things flow downstream, so. All right. All right, with that, I guess if there aren't any other recommendations for these, you can certainly do a motion to approve these for staff to head out for speakers bureaus, and we'll start with that.
Okay. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approved.
Angela and Brian, how quickly can you move on this? Like, are you ready to, like, because that's a lot.
It is, and we're having a meeting this afternoon with HVNA, so we knew you were going to hopefully do what you just approved.
Obviously,
And
most commissions meet once a month.
I know, and it's going to take some time.
things.
I do feel like we're falling a little bit behind on this, so if we do have to alter the survey longer, we can strategize and do that. But we're going to start on this afternoon and try to get on everybody's agenda. So, yeah.
Will the 101 or whatever brief you develop be shared with these committees so that when we get asked or we get told, hey, we saw the presentation at this organization, what do you think about this? We know what they're referring to?
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
Okay,
And we're
thank you.
going to, we have a very nice brief PowerPoint right now. We're working on making that into two PowerPoints, one a little more technical, depending on who we talk to, and then one a little less. So we will share both those with you so that you can do just that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, where's the agenda?
All right.
Do you have anything else for us, Brian?
Nothing else on the Speakers Bureau. Next is informational items, so we can start going through those if you'd like.
Yes, please.
All right. First, 6A is the updated technical committee roster. As I mentioned, hopefully everyone has one. If you don't, I can provide one for you. And this should be the final list. We were working after last meeting. We were working to populate with a couple more members, but it looks like we have everyone now. And again, as a reminder, if the primary listed on here can't make it, or if you have any additional people from your department you'd like to be copied on for the packets, let us know. And we just want to make sure that at least each seat has a representative as best as possible at every meeting. So certainly give us notice if someone else is going to show up. Yeah.
Brian, I noticed that Fort Carson was listed as a voting member.
We've changed that on the updated roster, so I'll get you an updated. That was one of the things we corrected, is that was an error.
And I believe Al's actually the director of public works.
He is director of public works. Yeah. Also, look through. If there's something incorrect on your title, let me know. If there's anything that needs to be corrected on here, let me know, and I'll get that taken care of. All right.
Is there a sign-in roster that, I thought I saw one, but I haven't seen it passed around? Okay, so I just encourage everyone to make sure their information is up to date for contact purposes.
Sounds great. Is this the sign-in? No, the sign-in roster's up front, but that's another copy there. Second, upcoming project milestones. We've already talked about some of these, but the last page in your packet, we have sort of a snapshot of the current schedule. So as Angela mentioned, we're currently doing, and as I've mentioned before, we're currently doing the telephone town halls. We'll do the second one tonight with Teller County, and then there'll be 2 more, which I don't remember the exact dates. Are those next week?
Next Tuesday, we are doing El Paso County, and then the following Tuesday, we are doing, or I'm sorry, that's wrong. Next Tuesday, we're doing Pueblo County. The following Tuesday, we're doing El Paso County. And we, just so you know, too, the first one with Fremont, we started with 7,000 phone numbers. Tonight, we're also doing 7,000 phone numbers. For Pueblo County, we're doing 12,000 phone numbers. And for El Paso County, we'll be doing 22,000 phone numbers. So we're excited about our potential for some input.
And hopefully what will come out of this as well is not only the input we get directly from the telephone town hall, but hopefully word gets out about the survey and more people start filling that out online. That's something we heavily are mentioning a lot of during the telephone town halls. So that's going to be going on, and then as mentioned, we'll be working on setting up the speakers bureaus. That'll be the next. So we will be reaching out to you guys and to everyone here, and just making sure that we're getting the word out and working on some, getting set up with these groups that have been approved by the committee. And other than that, we are continuing to meet with the various installations. We've met with Fort Carson, had initial meetings with Fort Carson, Air Force Academy, and Peterson. We're still awaiting official approval for Schriever to come in. We know that's coming at some point. And so next we're going to be trying to meet with Cheyenne Mountain, which I believe we have something set up for next week, is it?
Yeah, we're
trying to schedule something for next week, and then Schriever will certainly get you on board so we can come out and meet out there with your development group. So that'll be coming up as well as soon as feasible. And in the meantime, we're doing analysis of the documents that were recently provided by Peterson to just make sure we got all that information, and then we'll ask for information from Cheyenne Mountain and Schriever shortly to just make sure we have everything to kind of get background. And with that, obviously next the policy committee meeting is going to be in May, first week in May, and at that point we'll ask for formal adoption of your recommendations for working groups, and there'll be further discussion there of that. So that's kind of a highlight of what's coming up with project milestones. So that's it for those items. And next, if the chair is willing, the installation reports, if they have anything. So,
okay, please. I guess we'll start because Air Force Academy likes to be first. So, Bob, if you got anything.
No, not at this point.
Or Melissa, do you? Okay. Who's next? Looks like Schriever.
Well, Brian just mentioned this, but we're still unofficial participants. We've been monitoring the progress of the participation request letter. It's been making its way slowly through the Air Force bureaucracy. It's one step away from getting to Ms. Eidler, so we may have some good news to provide in the next week. So that's all we have.
I do represent the Colorado National Guard, and we do have several installations. But since all of them are either on the Air Force Academy or on Carson, with the exception of the thing on Chestnut Street, I don't really have anything to report.
Nothing for Peterson, Glenn, unless you've got something.
Okay. All right. Okay. No community. All right. Marshall, anything from Fremont County? Peter?
One update, we have selected consultants to update the city's comprehensive plan. It will be Logan Simpson, pending final contract approval and negotiations about price. So obviously it'll be about a 2-year process, if not longer. Obviously, typical comprehensive plan will have discussions on land use issues, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. So probably very timely. This study and the update of our comprehensive plan. So we're looking forward to that.
Darren? Pueblo West? Or Dan, sorry. Pueblo West? Nothing? Okay. Linda?
Our town hall is tonight.
Any other communities represented?
El Paso County, or
Yeah.
no?
What did you need?
Do you have any updates with El Paso County?
No.
All right. All right.
That's the agenda. Before we adjourn, I'd just like to go around the room one more time. If anyone has any final thoughts, alibis, comments, or questions for staff before we meet again. So we'll just, not to pick on Marshall, so we'll go start this way and go around. So, anything? Nothing? Okay, so my comment, there was a reason I did that. I would just like staff to work on let's have a conversation about how to address airspace, and maybe bring that to the policy committee, because I think it is a big issue, and I think it may either be a separate technical committee, it may be its own thing. I don't know how we're going to address it, but I think that it does need to be addressed. So, thank you.
When this land use study was first proposed, there was a big absence in there on Schriever Air Force Base, and I would tell you that I think one of the pressing issues that this community has is as growth grows to the east, that there's going to be some electronic interference taking place out there, and I will tell you that there is a lot more growth still to take place on Schriever Air Force Base, and I think committees have to be really careful of how that land use takes place and how the pollution of the electromagnetic spectrum takes place.
Have we considered that in our?
Yeah, that's actually one of our items for compatibility issues, and that's something that Schriever has certainly brought up that we'll be taking a look at.
Good.
I make a motion, we adjourn this meeting. Did I hear a second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. See you next time.